Your brain is not broken. Your brain is a legacy system, programmed for a world where energy was scarce and every movement had a high caloric cost. In the Paleolithic, burning energy for a non-urgent task was a fatal error, an evolutionary gamble you couldn't afford to lose. For the vast majority of human existence, energy conservation was the primary directive of the biological machine. Today, we look at our inability to start a project or clean a room and label it procrastination, but your biology calls it survival. For hundreds of thousands of generations, the human default was stasis. We were energy-efficient primates, designed to remain inactive until the absolute necessity of survival. A predator, a hunt, a seasonal migration, or a water shortage forced an immediate, high-output response. This was not a choice, it was a metabolic mandate. Your brain treats a modern work deadline the same way it once treated the shadow of a predator, or the distant rumble of an approaching storm. It performs a constant subconscious calculation of the minimum energy required to survive the encounter. If the deadline is distant, the threat is perceived as non-existent, and your internal fuel gauge remains locked in a conservation state. The core of the issue is a fundamental mismatch. Our modern environment has replaced the intermittent, lethal, and physical threats of the savannah with a constant, never-ending stream of low-level stressors, emails, reports, chores, and digital obligations. Our biology was never engineered to handle a to-do list that refreshes itself every morning. When you stare at a daunting document you haven't started, your amygdala isn't detecting laziness. It is detecting a lack of immediate, physical urgency. It is effectively waiting for the threshold of danger to be high enough to justify the metabolic burn. Only when the stress of the impending deadline triggers a significant cortisol spike does your system finally flip the action switch. This is the procrastination trap. We have inadvertently turned our most sophisticated survival mechanism, the ability to assess risk versus caloric cost, into our greatest modern liability. We are effectively trying to run a 21st century digital life on an operating system designed for the Pleistocene. We wait until the last second, not because we are inherently flawed or morally lazy, but because we are hardwired to keep our internal fire burning low, saving our limited, precious energy for the specific moments when we absolutely, truly need to run. It is a biological paradox. The very trait that kept us alive when resources were thin is the exact same trait that causes us to panic when we have infinite modern resources but finite time. To understand why we wait until the last second, we must look at the way our brains allocate energy. Every action has a cost. In a hunter-gatherer context, the cost of hunting a mammoth was high, but the potential caloric return was massive. The cost of standing up to fetch water was low, but the return was immediate. The cost of thinking about a project or doing paperwork, however, does not fit into this ancient framework. There is no caloric reward for finishing a spreadsheet, and there is no physical predator to escape. Consequently, your brain views the task as a net energy loss. It resists. It forces you to wait. It keeps you in the safety of the cave, so to speak, because moving out into the digital field feels like a waste of resources. This is why simple advice like, "just do it," rarely works. You are fighting against millions of years of evolutionary reinforcement that has taught your brain that energy preservation is a virtue. To overcome this, you cannot simply demand more willpower from yourself. You have to reclassify the work. You have to convince your ancient, primitive brain that the work is the leopard. When you manipulate your environment or your own internal narrative to make the task feel like an immediate survival threat, where the danger of missing the deadline is perceived as physically threatening, you finally override the energy-saving defaults. This process requires a conscious zoom out. You must acknowledge that the feeling of resistance you experience when faced with a deadline isn't a failure of character. It is the feeling of your biology performing its primary job, keeping you alive for as long as possible. Once you understand that you aren't fighting yourself, but rather you are managing a very old, very stubborn, and very efficient biological system, you can stop feeling guilty. You can start building systems that work with your biology instead of against it. We live in a world that demands we be always on, a pace that is fundamentally at odds with the burst energy architecture of the primate body. We are naked apes trying to survive in a landscape of high definition, high speed, and high pressure expectations. We are not designed to be constant, steady, efficient machines of production. We are designed to be erratic, high-energy burst survivors. The next time you find yourself waiting until the last possible second, Remember, your brain is simply doing what it was born to do. It is waiting for the moment when the burn is worth the reward. The goal, then, is not to force yourself to be a machine, but to learn how to present the challenge in a way that your ancient brain finds worth the calories.